Let's try something. Picture the Eastern Front of World War II in your head. I bet you're seeing something brutal, epic, right? The Soviet Red Army, this unstoppable wave of humanity, stopping the Nazi war machine cold in the snow. It's a story we all know, a story of T-34 tanks and the Great Patriotic War, a victory forged in Soviet factories and paid for with Soviet blood. But what if I told you that the real key to that victory, the one thing that turned all that courage into a conquering army, wasn't Soviet at all? And worse, what if it was deliberately erased from the history books? We're about to pull back the curtain on a story that was systematically hidden for nearly 50 years.
And boom, right there. That one sentence is the crack that shatters the entire official myth. And you have to understand who's saying this. This isn't some low-level officer. This is Marshal Georgy Zhukov. He was the Soviet Union's greatest hero, the architect of victory, the man who saved Moscow and took Berlin. And this wasn't some public speech. This was a private conversation in 1963, and, unknown to him, the KGB was listening in, their microphones recording every word. In a moment when his guard was down, he confessed a simple, devastating truth. Without American trucks, their artillery, the weapon they called the God of War, would have just been useless, giant lumps of steel stuck in the mud.
So that's the central mystery, isn't it? That's what we're really digging into today. How could a fact this huge, this fundamental, coming from the man at the absolute top, just disappear? And the answer is pretty chilling. It wasn't forgotten by accident. It was buried. It was actively, meticulously, and systematically scrubbed from the history books. This is the story of a 40-year lie.
Okay, so to really get why they went to such incredible lengths to hide the truth, you first have to understand the story they were trying to protect. The official Soviet version of the war wasn't just a story. It was the very foundation of their power after 1945.
According to this state-sponsored epic, the Soviet Union defeated fascism all by itself. It was the might of their communist industry and the unmatched courage of their people, period. That Lend-Lease aid from the Allies? Oh, that. If they even bothered to mention it, it was dismissed as a trivial 4%, basically a rounding error. But this wasn't just about national pride. This was political necessity. The myth of the lonely, self-sufficient victory was the bedrock of the Soviet Union's legitimacy on the world stage, especially as the Cold War was heating up. They simply could not tolerate the idea that they needed help, least of all from their new capitalist arch-rival, America.
All right, now let's look at the actual piece of evidence that unravels that entire official story. And it's not a tank or a plane, it's something way more basic, but way more important. It's the lifeblood of any modern army, the humble truck.
Just take a second and let that number sink in. 427,284. That is how many American trucks and Jeeps were sent to the Soviet Union. Now, on its own, that's a huge figure. But to really grasp its earth-shattering impact, you have to see it in context.
And this is where the facts just become undeniable. During the entire war, Soviet factories, even with their heroic efforts, only managed to build about 205,000 trucks. America sent them more than double that number. I mean, let that sink in for a second. The United States didn't just help the Red Army's logistics. For all practical purposes, America became the Red Army's logistics. Without this flood of vehicles, the Soviet Army would have literally ground to a halt by 1943.
And it wasn't just about the sheer number of trucks, it was a total game-changer in quality. The American Studebaker was a six-wheel drive beast that could churn through that infamous Russian mud that literally swallowed other vehicles whole. The Soviet ZS-5, on the other hand, was an old design with only two powered wheels. The Studebaker even had a winch on the front to pull itself out if it got stuck, an absolute godsend. And reliability? The American trucks could go 5 times farther before breaking down. They even came with complete toolkits and spare parts manuals, which was a completely alien concept to Soviet mechanics who were used to just cannibalizing one broken truck to keep another one running.
So the numbers are absolutely damning. But, you know, the most powerful evidence always comes from the people who were actually there, the men who ran the war. And these are the confessions they made behind closed doors, words they never, ever intended for the rest of us to hear.
This isn't some historian's opinion. This is a direct quote from Joseph Stalin himself. He's at a private dinner in Tehran with Roosevelt and Churchill. He raises a toast to American industry, calling the U.S. a country of machines. And then he drops this bombshell. The same man who was publicly dismissing American aid was privately admitting that it was the single difference between victory and defeat. And, no surprise, the transcript of that dinner was kept under lock and key for decades, only seeing the light of day in Russia after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
And here's Zhukov again. This time, it's not a secret KGB recording, but it's from interviews for his own memoirs. Interviews that the state promptly confiscated and buried in an archive. And notice how specific he is. He doesn't just say trucks, he says American studs. He is describing an army whose very ability to fight, whose entire mobility, was fundamentally American-made.
And the third voice confirming all of this is Stalin's successor, Nikita Khrushchev. In memoirs he secretly recorded and had smuggled to the West, he laid it all out. And he focuses on that critical word, maneuverability. You see, American trucks transformed the Red Army from a force that moved at the speed of a soldier's march into a modern, mechanized juggernaut. Those massive, war-winning offensives like Operation Bagration in 1944, they were logistically impossible without this American mobility.
So you have undeniable numbers. You have direct confessions from Stalin, Zhukov, and Khrushchev. How did a truth this solid simply vanish? Well, it was no accident. It was a deliberate, state-run campaign of historical forgery on a scale that is just staggering to think about.
This was the playbook. It started as early as February 1945, with a secret order telling censors to remove all Allied equipment from photos. Editors would literally paint over the American Studebakers in pictures, replacing them with Soviet models. Then came the fake 4% statistic, a true masterpiece of phony accounting. But the most insidious part was how they rewrote memory itself. When veterans would write their memoirs, state editors would go through every single line, replacing every mention of a Studebaker with the generic phrase, "our truck." And any historian who dared to question the official story, their careers were over.
And this timeline really shows you just how long and how total this deception was. The order to start erasing the truth came before the war was even finished. A year later, Stalin goes public with the official lie, and for the next 40 years the truth, just like Zhukov's real memoirs, was literally under lock and key in a state archive. It wasn't until Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, or openness, that the first tiny cracks in this wall of silence started to appear, and the whole 40-year lie began to crumble.
So, look, it's a fascinating story, a great piece of historical detective work, but you might be wondering, okay, so what? Why does a story about 80-year-old trucks matter to you and me today?
It matters because this story is a perfect case study. It's a blueprint for how a state can manufacture a foundational myth, in this case, the myth of solitary victory, and then defend that myth with everything it's got, censoring, falsifying, rewriting, and intimidating. It's a powerful lesson in just how fragile historical truth can be, and it's a permanent reminder to always question the official story, no matter who is telling it.
So what are the big takeaways here? Well, first, while the victors do get to write the first draft of history, the facts, hidden in secret recordings, in shipping manifests, in classified memos, they can survive. Second, it proves that modern war is a battle of logistics. Courage is absolutely essential, but that courage has to be supplied, fueled, and armed. Third, it completely reframes the victory over Nazism, not as one nation's lonely triumph, but as the triumph of an international alliance. And finally, it's a stark warning that national myths built on erasing the contributions of others are a classic tool for authoritarian power.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. We've just seen how the story of nearly 500,000 machines, the literal lifeline of an entire army, a fact confirmed by that nation's own leaders, was successfully deleted from popular history for 2 whole generations. It took the collapse of a superpower just to find the receipts. And it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. What official stories are being crafted right now? What inconvenient facts are being edited out of the photos of today? And what will future historians eventually discover in the archives about the world that we think we understand?